The Street Portrait Playbook by Daniel Arnauld. These are the lessons taught at Street Photography University at our photo walks in Dallas, Texas. Section 2. Composition. City as Graphic Design. 1. Include a point of interest. Your job in framing the shot is to take in the urban features as points of interest while avoiding distractions. Think of it as a balance of inclusion and exclusion. Why inclusion? If a shot lacks specific features in the location, then you might as well have been in a studio. Include a point of interest. The point of interest can be architectural or something as simple as a crack in the wall or a rusty metal hinge. Look for details that give character while not creating a busy distraction in the frame. How much to include is up to you. The painting on the rock is a point of interest. The continuous textured wall makes a great contrast of figure-ground relationship. The details of a richly textured surface remind us that photography can capture the real world. Texture in everyday life. Concrete walls provide texture and pattern to create an interesting backdrop. Their simplicity is great for the first 5 minutes of working with a model, as you can concentrate on building rapport and not solving more difficult composition and lighting problems. Texture brings a sense of reality to a flat medium. It is the graphic element that is both visual and tactile. Light rakes the surface and reminds the viewer of the sensation of touching rough or smooth texture. Texture is always present. Even polished metal and glass can be said to have a smooth, sleek texture. It can be a secondary focal point. It is not as distracting as other elements like color or typography. 2. Slotting. Exclude distractions. An important skill is slotting the model into areas of negative space where there are no distractions around the head, especially any lines that the eyes will track. Notice the rectangle of gray metal behind the model's head. The neutral color forms a shape to graphically isolate the subject without detracting attention. Ask yourself, are the edges of her head being lost or found in the background? Imagine a box around the model's head. Scan to see if there is any clutter in the zone of the box, especially look for vertical lines coming out of the head. Clutter is a visual tangle that messes up the clear separation of the figure from the background. You can fix most clutter by moving your feet to change your alignment. With practice, you will get very good at simultaneously placing the model in directional light for the face and slotting the city graphically to include interest and eliminate clutter. The open sky is a good way to slot a distraction-free zone around the subject's head. Once you've placed the subject in the best directional light, then move your feet to line up her head in the slot of negative space you find in the setting. Just as typed letters must be on a clean background to be legible, the subject must be separate from the background. Photographers have 3 ways of creating separation. 1. Depth of field through a low f-stop or telephoto lens. 2. Backlighting to create a highlight that outlines the subject. 3. Isolating the subject in a zone of negative space, slotting. Move your feet to change the alignment to the background. 3. Adding depth, layering, and perspective. Why do we need depth in our images? In reality, our view is often obscured by objects in the way. Therefore, without a sense of space and depth, your images will look artificial. You can design depth in an image by visually organizing the frame to show the space as a 3-dimensional world. Layering the real-world elements between the camera and the human subject also takes advantage of the journalistic quality of street portraits. The subject's wardrobe and the details of the scene all come together to create a definite time and place. Show this moment in this locale by using texture, layers, volume, and perspective to make the world look lived in. Using what's there. Layering. Placing meters, pipes, and utility boxes in the foreground is one of my go-to techniques. The subject appears to be in the city, creating an immersive image as the parts of the building come between the model and the viewer. Use the foreground layers to fill the negative space with something urban. It takes a second to figure out what she's hiding behind and why. Vary the position of the obscuring elements to find out how much or how little of the person you want to see to create the feeling of mystery. By touching the pipe, the subject is linked to the setting. Including the guts of a building is an unconventional way of captivating the viewer. Details tell a story, past, present, and future. layer after layer. Obscuring. How does challenging the viewer lead to more engagement with your image? 2 plus 2 equals... Make the viewer solve the riddle. Our brains are chemically wired to reward us for engaging and solving mysteries. Advertisers often use this technique. This portrait uses a utility pipe in the foreground to provoke the viewer to look closer at the limited amount of information in the girl's expression. Obscuring the subject by overlapping foreground layers will create a mystery for a viewer to solve. Foreground is the portion of the frame that is closest to the viewer. It can be used to draw attention to a subject located further in the frame, with much the same effect as leading lines, or a frame within a frame around the subject. Layering presents only part of the model's face, concealing the expressive details we use for social cues. Our instinct to read the emotions is challenged. We want to know more, to solve the mystery behind the obscuring layers. 4. Seeing with divergent thinking. The setting in front of you has shape, color, line, and texture. Once you begin seeing the urban features, not for their intended function, but as graphic design, then you are free to use divergent thinking. Crumbly walls become texture. Dumpsters become blue squares. Traffic rails become leading lines. Doors become frame within a frame. Intellectually, you might judge a scene as blight and disrepair, but visually, it is texture and layers of history. Peeled paint is like a mystery, a clue that another story is buried beneath the surface. Driving by, you might see this lot as rusty junk. As a photographer, you see texture, color, and layers. 5. Frame within a frame. Doors and windows are everywhere in the urban setting. Use them as graphic design, as they combine both point of interest and slotting. Not only does frame within a frame make powerful use of the principles of composition, it also touches on philosophical principles going back to Plato. Doors and windows form regular geometric shapes in the architectural background. When the lines of the building are near the image border, their relationship pulls the viewer inward. The double rectangle propels the eye forward with the momentum of movement from outer rectangle image border to the inner rectangle of architecture. As graphic design, the rectilinear shape around the subject acknowledges the photographer is selecting the composition through a rectangular viewfinder. The simple acknowledgement of shape gives order to a chaotic world. The viewer finds comfort in the design. It is simple. A person and a door. We are familiar with both. They give reference of scale, one to the other. When you go into the city to take street portraits, you are actually exploring an ancient concept. What is our relationship to the world around us? Every image is a philosophical statement because you're saying something about the relationships in space. The microcosm manifests the macrocosm. A single door can say as much about a place as a sweeping cityscape. In fact, according to the microcosm-macrocosm analogy, a door says more. Thinkers from the ancient Greeks and Romans, up through the Renaissance, and even through Bauhaus, believed that the human proportions should dictate how furniture, buildings, and whole cities are built. Applying this analogy, that the city should be in proportion to the individual, will inform how you place the subject in scale to their surroundings. Are they dwarfed by the towering buildings? Or do their personalities resonate in harmony with their surroundings? A door is the city. Do your street portraits harmonize the proportions of a human to their surrounding architecture? The Roman architect Vitruvius sought to harmonize the proportions of a temple to that of a man. Vitruvius said that a man's height and the reach of his limbs made the shapes of circle and square, and that buildings could be made in scale to man's measurements. Shapes have deep symbolic meaning. When used in architecture, the underpinning ideas are manifested in space, made permanent, and lived in. Ideas become form and function. The building becomes a place for man to live inside his own ideas. Frame within a frame uses the graphic design element of shape. This photo was taken to illustrate how point of interest, slotting, and shape come together. The meter and the padlock are points of interest. The gray metal box slots the model's head. The goal of a portrait is to represent the dignity of the person. If you would like a physical copy of this information, the print version is available on Amazon.